The first leg of the Champions League quarterfinals happened this week with Arsenal, Manchester City and 6 other teams battling it out for relatively few spots. And today I'm joined by Jon Mackenzie and JJ Bull to discuss just that next week and also who we think is going to win the Champions League overall. Jon, we stuck you on Arsenal Bayern 2-2, top line. Go on.
I think the thing that is really interesting now after 3 knockout games of the Champions League is that we're seeing teams willing to change the way they play against Arsenal. And it is causing them some problems, so that's the thing that I found most interesting about that game.
Okay, well, we're going to touch on that with Arsenal Bayern. JJ, we put you on Real Madrid, Man City, 3-3. A fun affair?
A very fun affair, full of magic and gold. And I enjoyed watching it immensely, and there were some tactical things that I liked. Also, there was a Barcelona game, and Pau Cubarsi is fantastic.
Good to hear that there was a lot of goal in that one. The other one is Atletico Dortmund, which we will come and talk about a little later too. But let's start at the Emirates, Jon, with, as we said, Arsenal Bayern 2-2. Main takeaway, you said already, you've noticing, at least specifically in the Champions League, that sometimes big teams or teams are willing to change the way that they would normally play against Arsenal, and this is presenting some problems. Will you explain how Bayern did that in this game?
Well, we've been talking all season about how Arsenal are probably the best out-of-possession team in the world. And I think what we're seeing now is that other teams are recognising if they try and compete with Arsenal in the out-of-possession phase, it's not going to work out for them. And so in the last couple of games against Porto and then in this game against Bayern, what we've started seeing is coaches just happy to sort of react to Arsenal rather than trying to control the game in the way that they might want to normally.
So what was it specifically that Bayern did in this game that caused Arsenal problems?
Well, Arsenal was described as being maybe an out-of-possession first team insofar as not only are they trying to use their out-of-possession to stop the opposition from scoring, they're also going to try and use it when the opposition have the ball in order to try and generate moments where they can score themselves. So one of the most interesting things I think we saw in this game was Bayern finding ways to stop Arsenal from being able to use their high press. Now, we talked a few weeks ago about Arsenal's high press. This is it here on the screen from a game against Liverpool, and we talked about this press as being a hybrid press, and what we mean by that is that Arsenal are going to generally sit in a sort of zonal structure, so they're covering all of the pitch, so you can see Arsenal players across the pitch. But they are going to be able to jump into man-to-man scenarios depending on what's going on the field. So if the ball's on one side, all the players will lock onto an opponent and make it hard for them to build up. If the ball's on the other side, they'll lock onto maybe a different opponent. And as you can see, this bunch of arrows all over the field shows you that the players have different responsibilities in different phases. So in order for this to work, you want those distances to be relatively small because you're moving between two players.
Yeah. And
what we're starting to see now is opponents using creative ways of making those distances bigger, moving players around because you know that, for example, we've got Martinelli over here. He's between these two players. This is a fullback. The fullback moves higher, then it changes the angles that he's going to be moving to. Maybe you can disconnect him from the forward press and create more space that you can then use to build up from. So I've got just a couple of examples of this. I've already said that one of the things you can do is push your fullbacks forward. So you can see the fullback slightly more advanced here. So you've got Martinelli in between the line of these two players. So you're keeping Martinelli a little bit deeper here. And you can see already a little bit of decoupling starting to happen with the front three here against the rest of the press. Another thing we're starting to see happen quite a bit when Arsenal playing is the pivot player just dropping in between the lines, because again, we've got 2 forward players who are responsible for the centre-backs and then another midfielder here, this is Jorginho, who's responsible for covering the pivot player if one of them jumps onto the centre-back. But if you pull this player deeper into the line, then he has to come as well because Odegaard is responsible for the outside centre-back as well. So again, finding ways of being able to manipulate the positions that Arsenal players are taking in order to create a lot more space that you can then build up through.
So Bayern are changing what they're doing to force Arsenal players to be in positions they might not want to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing we saw quite a bit of actually was quite interesting because Arsenal were making it very clear that they wanted to build up through Eric Dyer's side of the pitch. So you'd see the forward player Havertz start pushing really high from goal kicks in particular and then forcing around this way. And Bayern had some really interesting automatisms, so just practiced routes that they had to have the centre midfielder drop in and then play it out the other way, because if your press is designed to go one way, it's going to be weaker on the other side. So they were trying to find ways of playing around that. Here's the second half, and we can see even more exacerbated the fact that the centre-backs now miles apart because you're spreading the 2 front players apart. So you can see increasing the distances between the players. But another interesting thing that we're seeing here as well is we've talked already about how Martinelli's between 2 players. If Goretzka drops in alongside the other pivot player, he's pulled Martinelli with him. that has now created space around Kimmich, the fullback. So we're seeing this situation now where you're getting the centre-back and the fullback quite close together. You're happy to do that because you're, again, increasing the distance between the player who's responsible for both of those. So this was a really interesting game for me because what we're seeing is teams, once again, trying to find creative ways of making Arsenal's high-pressing phase less dangerous. And once you do that, you might not only make it much harder for them to actually control the game, keep you pressed in your own half, but you also find ways of reducing the amount of dangerous situations they're going to create from an attacking sense as well.
This might be an unfair way of framing it, but I'm wondering if there's a sense of humility that big European teams have that maybe isn't shared by some of the elite Premier League teams, because Harry Kane said after the game to English media as well as German media that they respected Arsenal and they were deferential to them through their gameplay. I can't really imagine like the big English teams doing the same thing.
I think it depends on the manager, right? We've just gone from a Porto.
It's only the nationality, John.
Yeah, no. Well, we've gone from a Porto team who are obviously the underdogs in a game against Arsenal. Yeah. They'll be happy to just say, fine, okay, it's going to maybe make us slightly less dangerous than we could be, but it's going to make that game state so much more level than if we try and take Arsenal on at the things they're good at.
And it was close.
And it was close, yeah. And then Thomas Tuchel, who we've seen already, he's gone through Champions Leagues and played quite deferential football. When he was with Chelsea, got all the way to the final, won that final against Manchester City, and then was happy to sit deep, give up a lot of the in-possession stuff and then try and hit on the break as well. So it could just be the case that Arsenal, if they get through these two games, they then come up against teams who are going to be way more idealistic and are not going to be willing to change the way they play, which, I mean, it could be Man City, Real Madrid. Those two teams have very different styles of play, but they also have very set styles of play that they will almost always use. That could actually play into Arsenal's favour if they get through this next fixture.
Worth saying as well, I think, before we talk about what might happen in the next game, I can hear Arsenal fans in the comments saying, well, the two goals that we conceded were very uncharacteristic. They came from defensive errors. I mean, I'm thinking specifically of the first one with David Raya was pushed really high up and there was a confusion in the back line. Those two goals conceded, they were very unlike the Arsenal team that we've seen for most of this season. So is there a scenario where going into the next game, they don't change anything, they just calm down?
Yeah, I think there's a few interesting things here because I've said a lot that Arsenal are predominantly an out-of-possession side. They're so good out of possession that they don't need to score many goals. If they concede 2 goals through defensive errors, they're suddenly in a scenario where they're going to have to work pretty hard to get the goals to even get ahead. So, and I think there's a few reasons for that. We could talk a little bit, if you wanted to, about some of the build-up issues that Arsenal have. And this is the reason why I think Bayern were happy to allow Arsenal the ball. They were happy to go long and have it turned over because I think a lot of teams won't consider Arsenal in possession to be as dangerous as some of the other elite teams. And I think there's very clear reasons why that is the case. So I've just got a couple of screenshots here to show you what was happening against Bayern in possession. And one of the things that we've been seeing a lot all season is that Arsenal do struggle in the first few phases of build-up. And in order to resolve that, what they do is they take players from further up the pitch and drop them in. So this is Arsenal building up. You've got 2 centre-backs here. This is Martin Odegaard and this is Declan Rice, the 2 number 8s. And they're in the first line of the build-up. And we can show you again later on. This is 4 minutes later, but I could show you 5 or 6 examples of this from the first half. Martin Odegaard now in the centre-back position, Declan Rice in the full-back position. The reason why this is a problem is not because you don't want these players in first phase build-up. You do. They're good players in first phase build-up. The problem is that when we look further forward on the field, we suddenly see that you're taking players from earlier lines and moving them into deeper lines. And so here we can see Bayern's back line just not under any pressure at all, apart from Ben White, which probably won't worry Alphonso Davies that much.
Sure.
And you can see that...
Should have done, though, more in the game.
Yeah, potentially. But again, this is Kai Havertz dropped in. We've got Martinelli who's come inside here. And this is Jakub Kiwior here, who's the other, sort of like an outside centre-back.
Yeah.
He's providing the width. This is going to cause you problems because even if you get through these first phases of possession, you then are faced with a structure which actually isn't particularly well designed for causing problems.
Okay. So who's going to win the second leg?
Well, I think the big question is what happens now in response to what we saw in this game. Because in the second half in this game, we saw Zinchenko being brought on and Gabriel Jesus being brought on, and that did change the build-up slightly. Okay. So we've got Zinchenko on the field here now, and he's coming inside, he's inverting as a fullback. Now, the reason why this is good, it's not just because Zinchenko is probably a better first phase build-up player than Jakub Kiwior, but it's that you're now taking a player from the back line and keeping them behind outside of the block, and you're allowing your other players that we were talking about before, Declan Rice and Odegaard, to be further down the field. So you can see now Odegaard is in between the lines, Declan Rice is now in this position, and now we can have Kai Havertz pushing forward onto that front line. So very clear that the substitutions were designed to try and solve some of these problems in build-up. And then a few minutes later, Gabriel Jesus comes on. This is the first action that he has, and it's actually receiving the ball between the lines, playing a bounce pass into Zinchenko, and now you're doing build-up inside the block. So clearly trying to solve some of those problems, trying to make them a little bit more dangerous in build-up. This was pretty much the second time, I think I counted, of Arsenal actually playing inside the block and being able to build up through it. It's 66 minutes. And at the elite level, teams generally tend to be much better at building through the centre of the pitch because it's just a much more dangerous way of generating chances. So for me, the big question is, do we see Arsenal start with Zinchenko and Jesus rather than what they did? And then the other question, I suppose, is will we see Bayern adopt the same approach? Will they be...
Well, they're playing in Munich as well. I mean, you would have thought that they might not be as deferential at home.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the interesting thing. Do we see them play the same way, sit deep, try and hit on the break, and make certain decisions that they made in order to try and cause Arsenal problems in their build-up?
The main question, though, was my one, which was who's going to win?
Yeah, for me, it's about whether or not the changes that Arsenal make actually solve the problems that we saw in the first leg. It's going to be more difficult.
Yeah, true, of course. It's always about that, but little stab in the dark. Just say a team name. 1, 2, 3, team name.
I think Arsenal, but I think it's going to be much closer than people think.
Now, JJ, we're going to move in to talk about Real Madrid, Man City now. Thank you, John. 3-3. A huge affair, very exciting. Main takeaways from the game, please.
What a game, what a time to be alive. As I said, full of magic and gold. Two of the best teams in the world with some of the best players in the world. What's not to like about it?
Very much the Dune 2 of football games.
Well, I would say less worms and less sand, more goals. And like this game now has the feel of a classical. People keep talking about it being like a new classical because it's a European one full of the big hitters. Now, things that are interesting about this game for me are some of the tactical things, which I could go through if you would like me to.
Please do, yeah.
Well, we think of Man City as being a very, well, maybe not this season so much, but like a very free-flowing, fun team to watch because they're nice and fluid, but they're not. They're very, very rigid and structured. Everything is decided by Guardiola. Everyone has the right position. You know what Man City's shape is going to look like. They have combinations and rotations and things like that.
They just make it look easy.
They make it look easy because they're just a really good team full of great players, very well coached. Some people often think that Ancelotti's not a very good coach or manager. He doesn't have any of the tactics, but he has some of the tactics.
Right, okay.
Guardiola has most of them.
Which ones does Ancelotti have?
Well, I think what he does is rather than giving real key team instructions, is he'll have a few things and how to work out how to find space in the opposition. So he'll give his players instructions and say, you will find space against Man City. Behind the fullbacks normally is where you'll often find them. Man City will try and play through the middle of the pitch. So if you vacate the middle of the pitch, then you're going to have more of the ball.
Yeah.
And so a few things they did to try and make this happen. So that for the start, Vinicius, rather than being wide left, just through the middle, he'd swap with Rodrigo quite a lot. But you had Mendy and Rodrigo occupying the same line quite a lot. So they're over here. And oftentimes what you'll find is that these guys will drop in together and they'll bunch together quite a lot. So rather than being very positional like Man City, they're more close together. So you get lots of combinations and you can outnumber Man City because they've got their positions to fill and they don't want to come over like this.
Almost like a rondo.
Almost like a rondo, but still also not quite like a rondo because what they're then going to have is you're playing to your players' strengths. So Rodrigo is good in these positions, Vinicius is good in these positions. You might think, well, you have to only occupy one. But you don't. You can have them all together and you get combinations. Bellingham can drop in, you can go forward. Carvajal is a defender you think of, but actually he spends most of the game up here in the lovely right wing position holding the width, and that frees up Valverde to come through. It doesn't even matter that Tchouaméni has to play centre-back because they're missing so many through injury. What you want to do is find the space in behind Man City's back line. So their back line's here, you want to push it up here because that's what they're going to do. You know they're going to pull up. Then when Man City push up, what they tend to do is, say we've got Grealish here. We know what Grealish is going to do every single time. He's going to get to this position here, get engaged 1v1 with the fullback. Someone will block the space inside, that'll be a midfielder. And so he can't go anywhere. He'll get here. He won't cross it in because he doesn't do that. He's not fun anymore. And so he'll go backwards. But this is all on purpose because it gives you control. You can control parts of the pitch.
Yeah. And they keep the ball.
Exactly. You keep the ball and then you can work it the way you want it to. So you can get the ball into the box the way you want it to patiently and your opponent can't counterattack because you've stopped them from doing it.
I believe they call it probing.
So we know what Grealish does. He likes to get here. He probes but rarely penetrates. And then what you have at the back is Man City will go man-to-man with their opposition to stop them being able to play out. But if Grealish were to make a cross into the box, like he rarely does now.
A penetration.
A penetrative cross. What you then have is an opportunity for Real Madrid to attack the way they want. So what you're going to try and do is create this space in behind the fullback because he will go with this player. So if it's, say, Vinicius swapping with Rodrigo, which often happens, what you'll find is Stones moves into midfield, because that's what they do, especially when they're doing the man-to-man press, and he'll be on someone tight. Let's put him on Camavinga, and he could be here. So you see you've got this space here. Diaz has to control this bit of the pitch, because they have this kind of shape. Now, if Vinicius is wide here, Akanji has a decision to make, because he's covering this space. This is the 3. This is your defensive 3 here. Now, Akanji, if he goes out to go tight to him like you're supposed to, if you get turned by a good player like Vinicius, which is very possible, you're in trouble, because then suddenly you're going to have this big space for you to get into. As long as someone doesn't give the ball away by doing something wild in football, like crossing the ball into the box to try and score a goal.
Yeah.
Now, let's say,
which
for
is
example,
presumably exactly why Guardiola doesn't want them to do that, right? Wants them to hold on to it to prevent such scenarios.
That's exactly correct. Now, let's look at some screenshots very quickly. This is Real Madrid trying to vacate the middle of the pitch. So we said Man City want to control it. This is the middle of the pitch empty, apart from Camavinga right here in the middle of the pitch, you see? That's Kroos and Valverde pulling out to wide areas, just like John's example earlier. And that's a midfield shape, doesn't look like a shape. And then you've got these players bunched together, because unlike Man City, Real Madrid will bunch them together so you get more of an overload on this side. They don't mind, because that's kind of fine. This is their back 4 shape, for example. Just a few seconds later. It's something that is just not really a back 4. But you've got Carvajal up here. Now, this all matters because you've got Bellingham in here, another player making loads of nice movements here. He could run in behind if he wants, or he could drop deep and offer a pass. Because they've vacated that middle of the pitch, there's space to run into. And then Man City's players, they're man-to-man, but I think it's Ruben Diaz here. Is he going to follow him in? Who's going to go?
Yeah.
It creates a little bit of confusion. But if you have Jack Grealish doing that lovely probing on the left-hand side, and he does cross it in and Real Madrid catch it, that's when they're in trouble. Because if you have a player like Vinicius dropping deep, a player tracks him, as you can see, comes out, but they've created this space because you can't be offside in your own half.
Yes.
So then, when he gets this and beats his player, what you've got is the space created in behind, so you can play the ball through and get in behind. And Real Madrid have done this in the last couple of games they played against Man City. This is what they do. They create the space here. So it's more about individual player instructions and lots of freedom with players bunching together to create some lovely movements.
It's I always find these games interesting as well, because I feel as though, with the exception of Manchester United, and I don't try to draw a direct parallel, there isn't another elite team in the Premier League that plays in that way, right? Like, it's kind of unusual for Man City to come up against a team like that with the quality of players that Real Madrid have in order to.
Well, it's unusual. I mean, these are the 2 teams you pick on FIFA. It's the 2 best teams in the world. So,
did you think one team got like more advantage from their tactics than the other? Because I always hear people talking about Real Madrid do things differently, and I watch the games and I'm like, yeah, they do things differently, but then they scored from 3 pingers, and it's kind of like, yes, obviously that matters, and they do that because they have those players,
and they keep doing it,
and
so every time
it must work, right? But at the same time, I think there is a question there about whether or not, if they were playing different tactics with those players, maybe they do better. So
equally, I mean, Man City, Foden scored an absolute pinger from 25 yards. It's a little rocket in the back of the net. The first one was a free kick where the goalkeeper sets up a wall, which is one person. And then, I can't remember the other goal was. Who was it?
It was Gvardiol from distance.
Gvardiol from distance, yeah. So Gvardiol, the left-footer centre-back coming inside and just launching one from distance.
I guess what I'm saying is, if you take all of the goals out of this, which team do you think deserved to win?
I mean, but both. Like both, because they both do individual things that are like, you don't get Valverde's rocket without the quality of Valverde.
Sure.
But also you don't get it without creating the space in behind the fullback for the player to get in to cross it to them. There's not so much automated attacks in that final third from Real Madrid. I'd imagine there maybe are from Man City, although we always hear Guardiola say, let's do what they want. I'd imagine the training sessions for both would be, this is where spaces, repeat these and do what you want. And then at Real Madrid especially, you trust the players to find their own solutions as long as you find the space.
Do you have a one-team word answer to your own question?
No, I didn't watch the game. I only watched the highlights. I was just interested because I always think in these situations, like it's hard to obviously hard to distinguish the team scored and conceded. But tactical aspect is like, did you get more upside against the other team? Were you more likely to win than the other?
There's something very accurate, but also hilarious about asking the question, like, if you took all the goals out of the game, who deserves to win?
But that should be I think that's what every tactical analyst should be asking.
They do, but like over the course of a season as opposed to one goal, right?
Yeah,
one game.
One game, no, of course, and you will do that. But I think that when you're analysing a game as even just a single game afterwards, and you think, okay, and we've said each of these goals, like there's an element of like incredible like variance to them. Like, you're not expecting Guardiola to score that goal, etc., etc.
Sure.
If you took all of that away, and that's hard to do, right? And why would you do it? Because football is about the goals. The goals were all great, and we love the goals. But an analyst has to be like, in the overall flow of the game, which team do we think was deserving? Like, did our plan work?
I totally
did
agree
their plan
with you.
work?
What I'm saying is the reason I love Real Madrid is because they baffle you.
Yeah, they do baffle.
And they baffle analysts because they are potentially going to be in the semi-finals, so in the quarterfinals of the Champions League again. They're always there at the business end of La Liga, and it's not always clear why.
Yeah,
I agree. And that's why they're the best team in the world. Okay, fine. Well, let's move on now to PSG Barcelona. We were in France for this one, in Paris. It was 2-3.
I wasn't in France.
You weren't in France.
Were you there?
No, but the players were. That's where it took place.
Okay.
Barcelona came out of this one with a narrow victory. JJ, you watched this. Pau Cubarsi. He's good, isn't he? Young 17-year-old centre-back.
One of the best young centre-backs, maybe the best young centre-back I might have seen. I don't tend to get excited by centre-backs, but this guy he gives me the same wow factor that I got watching Pedri for some of the first times.
Wow.
So I've seen him play a little bit this season. The reason he's so good, he's 17 first of all, it's not why he's good, but it's impressive what he's doing already. He's a massive lad for his age, but
he's a big boy.
He's a big boy, he can play, but he looks very comfortable on the ball. Xavi has said that when Cubarsi has the ball, his heart rate doesn't go up, and then Xavi's heart rate doesn't go up.
Yeah.
So when Cubarsi leaves,
he's going to die.
He's going to die. When teams tried to press Barcelona, and lots of players were trying to play it safe, but what Cubarsi does instead is he spots passes you can't even see on the TV. You can't see them. They didn't exist until he suddenly fires this. I mean, that's obvious, this one here. Yeah. But like,
that's a bad press, I would say.
Well, I would say so. But say that he just finds balls. It's body positioning shape. It's mostly body shape. You're tricking the opposition.
Yeah.
But even though you know he's going to do it, he still finds a way to reverse it in, and then that creates the space. The first goal Barcelona score is a pass from Cubarsi that beats about 5 or 6 pressing PSG players, and then they run straight through, and that's how when Lewandowski sets up a shot from someone, and then Rafinha slots it in on the rebound. But it's all because this player has the bravery to play through it. When you're playing these elite games against all the best players in the world, you have to take the risk to make the pass, but it feels like less of a risk with Cubarsi on it. Yeah. Same way with Pedri. He makes these passes that you shouldn't be able to make, but they're really risky. You'll mostly lose the ball, but they're always perfect, so you can just rely on it.
And we're going to come back in a moment to talk about this young core that Barcelona have. But the other impressive thing that Cubarsi did in this game was he was part of the defence that kept Kylian Mbappe relatively quiet, which is handy because here's Alex Barker with an explanation of how a team might do that.
So Kylian Mbappe wasn't very good against Barcelona, but it wasn't the first time he struggled this season. In fact, if we look at some of his recent games, we can see some teams now have a clear plan on how to consistently stop Mbappe. One of these teams was Newcastle, when they beat PSG 4-1 in the Champions League group stages. Eddie Howe's side did 2 things that made it difficult for PSG as a whole, not just Mbappe, to create goal-scoring chances. They aggressively pressed PSG, leading to consistent high turnovers, and Newcastle played a very high line backed by a goalkeeper who was positioned outside of his box, which made it very difficult for PSG to play Mbappe in behind the defence. So instead, the 25-year-old dropped deeper into this left wing zone. This is where the Frenchman usually starts causing problems for the opposition fullback. If they step up too high, Mbappe can knock the ball into the space behind them. But if the fullback sits too far off, then it gives Mbappe room to run at the defence or play a teammate in behind. But Newcastle were able to avoid these situations because there was always 2 players doubling up on him. That alone isn't enough to stop arguably the best player in the world, but it was the specifics of the positioning that made life difficult for Mbappe. A midfielder tracked back to cut off his access to central areas, while Kieran Trippier sat off, clearly conscious of being dribbled past, but still tight enough to deny him much space. By the end of the 90 minutes, Mbappe had completed 0 dribbles and registered 0 in non-penalty expected goals, the only time that's happened all season. But this tactical approach isn't always going to stop Mbappe from breaking into the final third. You also need a plan to stop him inside the Mbappe zone. A term coined by Mark Carey of The Athletic, Mbappe has gradually moved more and more to this left-hand side of the penalty box. This is where he's at his most dangerous. Not only is he capable of curling shots into the far corner, but as he's shown as early as the 2018 World Cup final, he's equally as capable of hitting the reverse shot into the bottom corner. Yet some teams have shown recently that it's possible to stop him causing problems in this zone, as Rennes proved in their 1-1 draw with PSG. Whenever Mbappe received the ball on the edge of this zone, Rennes made sure to drop a midfielder onto his right shoulder. From this position, the midfielder was able to cut off access to the centre and allow the fullback to concentrate on defending against Mbappe if he were to go on the outside. And if Mbappe did find a shooting chance, Rennes did something very smart when blocking his shots. We can see here that as Mbappe winds up to shoot, the defender drops his right leg down and raises his left shoulder up. By doing this, Mbappe's routes to both the top and bottom corners are blocked. This isn't a piece of defending that's just applicable to Mbappe, but it does go to show how important the small details are when you're playing against him. However, that's still not everything that Mbappe can throw at you. While he likes to drift to the left wing, Luis Enrique has been playing him more often as an out-and-out number 9 this campaign. That's seen him improve with his back to goal, helping bring other PSG players into the game like Ousmane Dembele and Bradley Barcola. And Mbappe has been getting on the end of cutbacks, losing his marker and finding space within the box. But this wasn't a problem for Barcelona, who ticked all the boxes on how to defend against him. They doubled up on him like Newcastle did, using Ronald Araujo and Jules Koundé. They cut off access to the centre like Rennes did, using Sergi Roberto to track back. And they stopped Mbappe from linking play together through the middle, by aggressively marking him with his back to goal. And when PSG works their way into the penalty box, Barca's midfield blocks the cutback chances too, by staying close to the defensive line and therefore covering the route to Mbappe. So double up on him like Newcastle, cut off his access to the centre and block his shots like Rennes, and separate him from his teammates like Barcelona. This isn't a bulletproof plan, but a blueprint is emerging, which means we may soon see Mbappe adapting his game.
Thank you, Alex Barker. That certainly happened in this game, JJ. But back to Barcelona. That young core, chef's kiss, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got a really good thing building there. They obviously have huge economic problems because they have no money.
Sure.
They're basically...
It's very boring that though now, isn't it? I was really excited about that last year and now I'm very bored.
It's a very boring story.
Yeah.
Well, they have this great young core of players. Cubarsi, Pedri, Gavi's been injured for a long time. Then they've got a left back, Alejandro Balde's been injured as well. He's more like a winger here. But they've also got Lamine Yamal, who's like 16-year-old, nearly 17 winger here, all very talented. But you've got Cubarsi and Pedri are unbelievable players. But the core of the team is how you build around the core. That's how you make your team great. They can't afford to buy anyone, so it's a problem. Ter Stegen's one of the best goalkeepers in the world. Araujo and Cubarsi, I think, is a decent centre-back combination now. You've got Araujo, I think you need a mentalist at the back. You need someone who everyone's scared of. It's Araujo. Then you've got Cubarsi, who's the real bit of quality on the ball to play out from the back. Then once you've got Pedri there, unbelievable player. Gavi does all things out of possession that make everyone else play better, and he is busy on the ball.
And is quite charismatic as a player.
Yeah, it makes everyone play better. He's great.
Yeah.
Balde, left back, like I said, you've got this good young core of players, the right winger and left back. So once Lewandowski is replaced with whoever's younger than him that comes through, don't know who that'll be, they could have a decent team that can compete. I mean, they're competing against PSG. They beat them in France. And you think that this is a team now who, if they can control the second leg against the players like Mbappe in the same way that they did in the first one, they might be okay.
Also, if they can hold on to some of these young players. I mean, we were talking about this outside earlier, John. The funny thing about Barcelona, JJ referenced it already, they're in a huge amount of economic trouble at the moment, and then they're a bit of a dip from a footballing perspective too. But the one thing they can always rely on is just suddenly having 4 or 5 absolutely incredible players out of nowhere, which reminds me a bit of Manchester United in the Premier League, who, you know, we've seen again this season, Kobe Mainu coming through, Camboala playing centre-back at the moment, Garnacho recently. You think this might apply across all of the teams?
I think all of the big teams in the top 6 of the Premier League in the last few seasons have had a player who's been probably their best player who's come through their academy. So Harry Kane's obviously at Bayern now, but he was a big part of why Spurs were so good. Phil Foden is now doing it for Manchester City. Liverpool have got Trent Alexander-Arnold. We can go through all of the teams, and there are really important players there for them who you do get through your academy, which I suppose in a reality where academy players are being treated as a sort of get out of jail free card for FFP, it seems a bit of a shame, because this could be the saving of Barcelona if they can get a good core of La Masia players coming through. Yeah.
Also, this is the kind of thing that if I was a fan of a team outside of the top 6, I'd be furious about, because it seems very unfair that you can, you know, let's be honest, you can mess about for years, do really badly and buy really bad players and have a terrible recruitment policy.
It's like those newspaper articles, isn't it, where someone's like, I bought my first house at the age of 21, and then you read the small print and it's like, my
parents bought it for me.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of parents, Atletico always, they feel like an old team, don't they? Still doing the same old thing. Diego Simeone there. That segue didn't work, but we're going to push through with it, because they beat Dortmund 2-1 at the Metropolitano. I find it funny. It's a bit of a funny one for Dortmund this season, and to a certain extent last season as well. because Bayern are wobbly right now, and they really, you get one chance every 10 years to capitalise on that, and they have not capitalised, John.
Yeah, they've had a rough few seasons. They threw away the league title last season on the last day, and yeah, this season it looks like Leverkusen are going to be the team who thought it would be the ones who toppled Bayern at the top. But this Dortmund team is just so hard to read. They're very much a vibes team as well. They've had so many games this season where they've looked abject in the first half and come out in the second half and actually pulled games back. So yeah, I have no idea who's going to win in Dortmund, but it could be the case that Dortmund go brrr, but it also could be the case that they just get turned over by Atletico.
What do they go? Brrr.
Brrr. That's how they go. Yeah, you just score a goal out of nowhere and then suddenly...
Okay. Well, fine. That's all the games. Prediction time now, of course, because what would this be if I didn't force you into something you didn't want to do? JJ Bull, I'm going to begin with you because I know John will need to take 15 minutes to think about this. Who's going to win the Champions League?
The team that scores more goals most often than their opponents. And I think that will be one of Real Madrid, Man City.
Don't you dare. Don't keep listing. Say one. Real Madrid. He said Real Madrid. Okay, fine. I mean, it's a safe bet.
I think Man City will win it.
Yeah.
Or Real Madrid.
Yeah. John.
I think it's hard to make these sorts of predictions because what you do is you think who's the best team, right? And then you go with that. But a lot of it's to do with matchups.
Tell us more about your thinking.
We've spent half an hour
tell us more
talking about how Arsenal have been...
Just say a team name.
Have suffered from matchups. So I think that on the basis of the remaining matchups,
yes,
Manchester City will win.
And you're saying that because you think that they would beat Arsenal in the next round?
Yes.
Could it be Barcelona or Real Madrid in the final?
No. Oh, yes. It could.
That'd be nice. I'd like that.
It could be.
That'd be fun.
El Clasico.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence, and Rafa Honigstein. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.